Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we will examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. Throughout the history of this country, there has been an uneasy relationship between black people and white people. From slavery through Reconstruction and Jim Crow to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Lives Matter, the ebb and flow of tension has seen times of cooperation and unity, as well as those that haven't been so civil. This uneasiness is very evident in any neighborhood where a racial minority moves into an area of the racial majority. This scene is played out in the recently published book, Rebecca, Not Becky, where authors Christine Platt and Wigginton Greene explore the joys of interracial friendships, what can be gained from them, and what our children can teach us. Written in the wake of the rise of diversity, equity, and inclusion committees and workshops, Rebecca, Not Becky is an example to show us that we are more similar than dissimilar, and we should approach each other from a position of tolerance and understanding. To expand on this discussion, we welcome to the classroom today the authors of Rebecca, Not Becky, Christine Platt and Wigginton Greene. Ladies, welcome to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Thank you for having us.
What was the actual motivation for the two of you writing this particular book? So kind of tell us all about DeAndrea and Becky with the good hair. Rebecca.
Oh, Becky with the good hair. Yeah. So I guess I'll start by saying, Catherine and I first met as colleagues when I was working as a managing director for the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center at American University. I met her as a documentary filmmaker through the filming of her documentary, I'm Not Racist, Am I? And so we screened that documentary at the National Anti-Racist Book Festival. And so that was my first introduction to Catherine. We both live in the city. We're both moms. And we became colleagues and then friends. And so we'd been working in the anti-racist educational space for decades, individually and collectively, I guess, almost 30 years. And so in 2020, in, the wake of George Floyd's murder, we, by that time, had already done so many workshops together, been in conversations with, so many academics and, activists and advocates doing this work. And we were watching sort of this theme play out online because we were all home because of COVID. And so I think there was just more online activity and presence than ever before. And because, this murder took place during this time, we started to see these trends that were emerging on social media, right? And it was a lot of, performativeness and oftentimes, unfortunately, what we know from this work is that, folks really do think they're doing the right thing, right? Yep. So I don't want to use performance in that way and make it seem like, they all knew that, they were just playing around, right? But like a lot of people thought this is what it means. This is what it means to actually, quote, do the work, end quote, right? I'm supposed to post. I'm supposed to buy every book on the anti-racist syllabus. I'm supposed to, follow these influencers and post my black squares, right? And so what Catherine and I and so many other practitioners in the field saw was this really growing need to sort of address what was happening. And Catherine and I thought, what better way to do that through the lenses of fiction? And that is how the idea for Rebecca, Not Becky was first born.
Well, that sounds great. And I think even though you say that it's a work of fiction, it's something that you can really, it's a relationship that can build and grow in any suburb in the United States today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's so funny. Catherine and I were laughing. We recently, the book came out on December 5th. And so we've had an opportunity to be in conversation with folks who have read the book, and we've done a couple book talks, and it never fails. We continue to hear, okay, so about this fictional town of Rolling Hills, it kind of sounds like my community, right? I mean,
Yep.
We've just seen and heard that so many times. And that is what we hoped would happen with the book. Catherine?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we wanted to do as well was just with folks wanting to kind of engage in this crash course in racism and, hurry up and learn all the things that Christine and I had spent, more than a decade, nearly 2 decades, learning, raising our awareness, digging into the analysis and the history and all that. And people wanted to just all of a sudden understand how it was we got to where we were and how could this still happen in this day and age. And just this angst and people wanting to do the right thing. And it was so heavy and fraught at that time. And so that's also why we turned to fiction, because we thought, what if we could do this in a different way, where we brought a little bit of humor into it so that we could come to, in levity, and come to a place where we could stop taking ourselves so seriously while still taking the issues seriously. And we're able to do that through the stories of these 2 women and how their lives converge. And we hope that that really provides an opening, an invitation for people to say, okay, yes, this work and this issue is so serious. And if I take myself so seriously day in, day out, and try and read, a lifetime's worth of anti-racist analysis in the course of, 3 months, I will not be able to maintain that level of engagement. I won't be able to keep up the endurance. And so we want to have these moments where we can take a beat, read about people like Rebecca and DeAndrea in the novel, and, connect with it, learn from their stories, self-reflect, and then be able to keep going, because otherwise we won't be able to keep going. It's too hard. It's too heavy.
No, I think you're absolutely right. If we're, again, looking at the fallout from the George Floyd murder and all of the vitriol that came out because of that, and all of the posts and everything, I mean, we were on the 24/7 news cycle, basically. And so that you could never really get away from it. And when you are ingrained in something that deep for that long a period of time, it does weigh on you. It does become very heavy. And so I think that having a book like this, where you can take a more of a lighthearted approach to this topic, makes it more palatable. It opens up. It makes it more likely to open up those lines of communication. And I think that's what you were getting at. But before we move on, I do want to let our listeners know, because they don't have the benefit of seeing you like I do, that our listeners, that Christine, of course, is African-American and Catherine is Caucasian. So I wonder, is there any bit of either of you in the characters?
Well, DeAndrea is a mother of 1 daughter. I, too, am the mother of 1 daughter. She is a reformed lawyer. I, too, am a reformed lawyer. And my middle name is actually Andrea. So there you have it. No, I mean, we definitely have, our own lived experiences, that of our friends, and I think having done this work for so long, there isn't any question that we've been asked, or it's rare that it's something that we haven't heard, right? And so we know some of the common threads and themes that come up in these spaces when it comes to this work. And so we tried to weave all of that into these characters, the protagonist storylines, their husbands' storylines, their children, and also that of their friends and the communities in which they live. So yeah, you get a little bit of us. I think there's probably more of me, DeAndrea, than Becky. What about you, Catherine?
I love that question because, because it's an education-focused podcast, I'll go maybe a little bit more into a little bit of wonkiness than I might normally. And you said don't speak in sound bites, so I won't. So I was thinking about this as Christine was talking with your question. There's a racial equity tool. It's from racialequitytools.org, actually, that we've used for a long time in this work. And one of these resources talks about racial identity development. And it talks about what that might look like for people who are mixed race, for people who are Black, Asian, white. And so when I think about the layers of white racial and the steps of white racial identity development, the path that follows, I think that there is a lot of me in Rebecca when I think about that. We meet her 3 years post a George Floyd-like event that woke her up. Now, I will say that is not my experience. As Christine said, we were doing this work for longer, but I did have an awakening at a point in my life. I did not wake up like this, digging into the analysis and spending so much time in this. And so I went on a journey myself. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, very white community, existence. Everybody in my family was white. And so then those steps involve, like, once you start to become aware of it and you sort of see the matrix of structural racism, then you start to see it everywhere. And then you want to tell everybody about it, like with an evangelical fervor. I have certainly been there. Rebecca has been there. Wanting to tell everybody around them that they're racist and thinking that that's the work. So there are moments in her growth and her development that are certainly part of me as well. And I try to bring that into Rebecca's story with a sense of humility and humor so that other white people can also go through that and have a little less judgment of ourselves and others, because there's nothing more intense than a white person who has just begun this kind of work, who then meets a white person who hasn't started it yet. And then it just gets wild and it becomes very intense and it is not productive. And so I wanted to play with that a little bit too with the book.
And that's the type of activity that plays out in real life, because now it's a matter of is it life imitating art or art imitating life? Because these are real conversations that will happen. And you have the one person who is quote unquote woke because of everything that's taking place, and they want to go out and teach everyone else to say, this is what I learned and you need to learn this too. And they're all gung ho about it. But then then they run into their Black counterparts and say, okay, pump the brakes a little bit. You're getting a little ahead of yourself here. This is our lived experience and you're kind of appropriating it. But how do you get these two characters in the book to navigate those waters, to be able to take this fervor for this newfound awakening, as you put it, and that Rebecca had, and you couch that with how DeAndrea is going to approach that, because now she's almost like the guinea pig in this whole situation, to put it mildly. So how do you couch that relationship and how did they grow?
So believe it or not, probably the hardest part of, at least for my first chapter, Catherine just kept pushing back on this idea, like, why I need to know why DeAndrea would move to this town. Do you remember that? I was just like, she just ends up there, and it wasn't believable. Right. And so I think for me, that sort of set the tone for how I wanted DeAndrea's journey to be with that pushback. Why would they move to Rolling Hills when DC is right up the street? Like, we need a real reason why they are going to go from Atlanta and not just go to Chocolate City, but instead go to White Chocolate City of Rolling Hills, right? And so the way we get these two women's lives to converge is that DeAndrea, her husband Malik, and their 5-year-old daughter Nina, they have to move to Rolling Hills because that particular town has one of the best memory care facilities on the East Coast. And DeAndrea's mother-in-law has been recently diagnosed with dementia. And so that is how we move her into this fictional town. And Catherine and I also, as we were building these characters, thinking about the lives of women in the many different things that they are also navigating in addition to, their racial identity, right? And so we wanted them to be mothers. We wanted them to be wives. We wanted them to be caretakers. We wanted them to be, having friendship dynamics and challenges, right? Because these are all things that are happening in our lives. And one of the things that, Catherine said early on, she said, we want this to be like a very realistic book that does not ignore race. And so that is what we are seeing through these different character storylines. And when DeAndrea moves to this, whiter than white suburb, she's expecting to run into some Beckys and Karens, but she never expects that her therapist is going to challenge her to make a white friend, to adjust to this new environment. And enter Rebecca Milan.
Catherine, you want to tell us about Rebecca now?
Yeah, sure. It's funny because we just had someone recently ask us, how did DeAndrea feel when she found out that she was just what the doctor ordered for Rebecca? And so Rebecca formed in the wake of this George Floyd-like event. She forms the Parent Diversity Committee at her school. She bought every book on the anti-racist syllabus, did not read them, but she bought them. She tried to do all the right things with her young children. She got a sign put up on the town that said, "All are welcome here." And then she realizes very early in the book that all of those efforts have been for naught because her children, one of her daughters says to her point blank, we don't care about racial diversity here. And Rebecca almost spits out her coffee. She's beside herself. How could she be doing all of these great things? And her child says something like this. Mm-hmm. And of course, because as children do, they implicitly take in all of the information around them, their surroundings. And they saw that, well, why would we think that diversity is important when there is no racial diversity in our lives, except for the only person Rebecca can name is the security guard at their front gate. So she is beside herself when DeAndrea Whitman and her family move to Rolling Hills, because here's her chance to really put all that diversity work into action in real life and prove that she's a good person, a good ally, because now there's finally going to be some racial diversity in their town and in their school. And so that's what we find out about Rebecca's, and we hope happens with her, is that she initially sees DeAndrea as a Black woman only, someone who's there to fulfill a need for her in her town, in her very carefully controlled life that she wants to have, with everything just the way she has curated it. And in comes DeAndrea to make her feel better about herself. DeAndrea sees right through that. And why would she want to be friends with somebody who sees her that way? And of course, Rebecca misses an opportunity there to actually be a good friend and be a good community member and citizen, to say like, oh, here's this woman who's moved here. She's probably lonely, homesick, doesn't even try to find out for a while why DeAndrea is there, and misses the chance to connect with somebody who could really be a support system. And they could do that for one another because they have so many things going on that are so similar.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guests today are the authors of the new book, Rebecca, Not Becky, Christine Platt and Catherine Wigginton Greene. Now, of course, I know that we say that this is the fictional town of Rolling Hills, but of course, it sounds a lot like Arlington, Virginia or Silver Spring, Maryland. We're going to park that right there. You mentioned something about Rebecca's daughter and one of the remarks that she made. And I think we get into from the mouths of babes is the phraseology, but children are always prone to say just the right thing at the right time. So when we think about how do we express this diversity and equity when we don't practice it? Are those diversity, equity, and inclusion movements that we're doing, all that work that we're doing between the workshops and the committees, is it having an effect? Is it really having an impact on our society at large?
Part of me wants to say, well, as someone who leads a lot of those workshops, yeah. Course they are. And I think some communities and institutions and organizations are doing really great work around trying to change culture, build relationships, really examine their policies and practices to really ask the hard questions of, is this serving everybody? Is this a place where everybody want to be? Are we being fair and equitable. And then a lot of times, and what we see in the book is Rebecca formed the Parent Diversity Committee. And because she did it sort of unilaterally without any other woman of color working with her, she misses the mark in terms of what would be meaningful work there. So it becomes about what we talk about in anti-racist education. It's focused only on food festivals and fun. And while I think multicultural festivals and having all sorts of, cultural celebrations are important, we don't want to not do that. What happens is we stop there and we think that's the work, rather than saying, okay, why might we only have white people in this community? What is it about this place? Perhaps it was formed because of structural racism. Perhaps our entire town exists because of structural racism. And those are the kinds of things that we could start doing and that Rebecca could engage in. And I think that a lot of communities are trying to do that. But sometimes we stop at the food festivals and fun piece, and then we still are left to look around and think, okay, we still have a very homogenous community. We still have people that aren't being served, children, students who aren't able to achieve their fullest potential. And those are the questions that we really want to be asking. So we just can't stop at the fun.
I agree. And I think DEI definitely has gotten a bad rap lately, right? I think it's rather unfortunate because, I know people that do good work. I know schools that do good work. I know folks that are really invested and have brought about meaningful change in their schools, in their communities, right? And so this work has been around for a long time. Its name has changed many different times, right? But, there has been a consistent sort of commitment to moving the ball forward when it comes to this work. I think what unfortunately happened, which is what happens in a lot of different industries whenever there's a lot of attention that is placed on a particular topic, there was a moment where DEI became very commodified. And unfortunately, that led to just this oversaturation of the market and also making it a lot harder for businesses and organizations and even individuals to be able to decipher and distinguish between what was meaningful work, what is not meaningful work, what is helpful, what is not helpful, right? And, a lot of the conversations that Catherine and I have had, a lot of the workshops that we've done, and we're very careful not to say training, right? There's training. Training has a very different sort of expectation.
Very different meaning, yeah.
Right. But when it comes to some of the workshops, I think, we may take a different approach, right? I think it's a lot of anytime there is this constant sort of reinforcement of things that aren't, I don't want to say are not helpful, but it's like it's a term or it's not an actionable step you can take, right? Like there's only so many ways that you can teach this definition. We really try and approach it through teaching people the history of understanding race and racism in this country, right? Through the novel, we talk about and show what it means, like how your lived experiences can inform your actions and your choices, right? And so, again, I'm going to always have a heart for DEI because I do know so many wonderful folks, and I do know people whose lives and communities have been changed. But I think we just, like with anything any industry that has become commodified, we just have to be mindful of our choices when selecting practitioners and programs.
I think that one of the things that really struck a nail in, I don't want to say nail in the coffin of DEI, but really that brought it down or gave it a bad rap is people came into it with the wrong mindset, as far as they thought that DEI was going to be the silver bullet, the be all end all, and be this quick fix to everything. And that's probably what led to the negative feelings that people have towards it, not understanding that it's a process. It is going to be a long process, and it has to be an honest process. And you're going to have some tough times. You may even have a couple of setbacks, but that's part of the ongoing process of it all, which is, really it's part of any relationship, right? So it's really more about relationship building than being a quick fix to say that, oh yeah, I see color or I don't see color, and where do we get that terminology and all of that? So what I'm trying to ask is, should we really focus more, therefore, on the relationship building aspect of DEI as opposed to just the definition delivery of DEI?
The thing that is unfortunate about the expectations that people have about DEI is something that Christine was alluding to, which is oftentimes it's the line item in a budget it's called training. This is something that's pervasive throughout education, our entire education system. It's not just in corporate America, that you are going to learn something and I'm going to give you a list of outcomes that will happen after I deliver this lesson to you. We have these expectations where we can scale everything, we can assess everything, and that after a certain amount of time, you are going to leave a room after information is presented to you, and then you can do X, Y, and Z. And when we are talking about race and identity and centuries of structural oppression and how it's affected us individually and institutionally, that is not something we can train away. It's not something we can really scale. We cannot scale relationship building. And so this is how I think we do want to reframe this a little bit. There are certain things that we can learn where we can tell you what you need to be able to do when you finish it. I'm talking about things that are in the sciences, math, engineering, tech. I know we can do those in certain ways, but also even when we learn anything new in a subject matter that seems so straightforward, like math or science or engineering, it still is a very hard emotional experience to learn something that you didn't know before, even if it's math. I mean, I have meltdowns teaching my children, like helping them with their math. In fact, that is in the book. Rebecca has a meltdown trying to help her daughter with math, and that reflects me. And it's really emotional, and you go through this identity crisis of why can't I do this? And that happens with this work as well. And so when we bring it into the workplace, that makes it even more complicated. In the classroom, it's even more complicated because we're not supposed to be emotional. We don't really have space for that. And so I think we do need DEI. I'm with Christine. These are really important conversations. And you know, we have to bring this into every space that we're in. And it is about relationship building. It's critical. And we have to stop calling it training. I can't train you how to act around somebody. Yeah. We're not robots. Like, please, let's not do that.
Yeah. And I think, Catherine, along those same lines, you know, you and I talk about this all the time, the expectation that something is going to happen in an hour, in a half day, right? Like, I'm always like, if it were, trust me, I wish it were that easy that I could come in here, you know, show you this PowerPoint presentation about the history of race and racism in this country. And you would walk out of here, you know, able to go out and say, I am, you know, and listen, I am also one of those practitioners. You'll be hard pressed to have me give out a certificate, you know, like I just have a very different approach, right? Because to Catherine's point, this is about relationship building. We want people's hearts to be in it. We want their minds to be in it, right? I'm not going to reward you for something that I think that you should be doing just to be a contributing member of society, right? And so I think, you know, unfortunately, because as we were talking about earlier, that commodification, there were a lot of things that have made their way into DEI that are not and have not historically been a part of the work. And I think that is some of the challenges that we're seeing, and a lot of discomfort and disease.
And unfortunately, I will have to stop our conversation right here. I mean, we could go on for the next couple of hours talking about this, but we would certainly like to thank our guests today, the authors of the new book, Rebecca, Not Becky, Christine Platt, and Catherine Wigginton Greene, for coming on our show today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Once again, my name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.